You're a journalism student. You're in a broadcast journalism class. You probably have some concept of what broadcast news is. And what you think it is might be very different from what your parents think, or your friends, or even some of your classmates. So first, let's all get on the same page about what it is we're learning about in this class and more broadly in the broadcast sequence. When most people think broadcast news, they think this.
Today for Tamron Hall, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. And at this hour, we begin with breaking
around the country are now asking, what does this mean come November? Let's check in with our
political news. The Associated Press reporting tonight that Hillary Clinton has now secured enough delegates to win the Democratic nomination.
To politics now, there is new outrage surrounding a tweet sent out over the weekend by Donald Trump.
Sources say Trump has resisted traditional mock debate practice and plans to rely more on his
private email server as Secretary of State. Clinton has said she did it.
The doctor confirms that she was diagnosed with pneumonia on Friday.
CNN ORC national poll, which shows Hillary Clinton 5 points ahead of Donald Trump with just 5 weeks to go before Election Day.
We're seeing a level of frustration bubbling up right now across the nation. To call a race
top-line horse race, that four-way race, we're showing basically a margin of error race. Trump with a 2-point.
Apologies for the 2016 election throwback, but I made that with After Effects and I like to show it off. So yeah, when people think of broadcast news, they think of an anchor at a desk. They think of words scrolling across the bottom of the screen. They think of reporters out in the field holding a microphone and standing in front of a car crash or a fire. And that perception of journalism as man reads news at desk is very pervasive. In 2 studies I did in 2016 and then again in 2018, I asked people, what comes to mind when you think of news media? Almost 90% of people named some sort of video news source. Over 50% mentioned cable news specifically. And about 40% of everybody we asked, that's over 1,500 people, mentioned CNN. So this, and this, and this are what most people are thinking about in terms of broadcast news. But what about this? Or this? Or this? Where do these things fit in the world of broadcast? In this class, we are going to focus on these because that's where you start with the traditional stuff. But the formats, the style, the storytelling, the reporting skills that you're going to master will apply to everything from documentary-style videos to over-the-top news apps on streaming services to reporting with cutting-edge technology like augmented reality. Okay, let's zoom way out and look at the big picture of broadcast news. This is the U.S. news media ecosystem. What I want you to notice here is how many Americans are saying that they get news from broadcast sources. Local TV news comes out on top, and that might surprise some of you because you might not get news from local TV channels, but older folks most definitely do. Cable news, national TV news, and radio are all up there too. You might be a little surprised by these numbers, but as you can see on this chart from the Pew Research Center, this is where people prefer to get local news. Online news is catching up with the popularity of TV news, and there's of course big differences across age groups. Zooming in on our TV news options, you're going to see something a little perplexing. One reason that it's kind of weird how often people name CNN and other cable news giants when they think of news is that not that many people actually watch cable news. Look at the views, about 1 million people during prime time. Network news is 5 times that. Even local news channels pull in 3 times as many people. The point is, there's still a lot of eyes on very traditional, classic news formats. Let's break down what we mean when we talk about local, network, and cable news. First of all, the television news industry is composed of the national news networks, ABC, NBC, CBS. But when we talk about NBC, we're really talking about the national network like Lester Holt on Nightly News, Savannah Guthrie and Hoda Kotb on The Today Show. But you've also got local affiliates of the network, so if you call the local NBC 12 and ask to speak to Lester, you're probably not going to get anywhere, and people seriously do this. I used to work the assignment desk at an NBC affiliate, and people would call and ask to speak to Brian Williams, and they would be very upset if you didn't put them immediately through, because they clearly had something very important to tell him. These local stations like NBC 12 don't really have a lot to do with NBC the network beyond sharing some content, and obviously they air all of the NBC programming. Then you've also got Public television like PBS, locally that's been rebranded as Virginia Public Media. Then you've got cable news, of which, MSNBC is owned by NBC Universal, which is actually owned by Comcast. And there's a whole world of TV news outside of the US. Of course, you've got the BBC in the UK, CTV in Canada, RT in Russia is actually a state-run network. Then you've got app-based news like Newsy, and web-based news like Vice. Let's move on to radio. In radio, you've got public radio, NPR. You've got commercial radio stations like you probably listen to in the car. Those are only going to do short news updates. You've got talk radio, you've got podcasts, and you've got satellite radio like Sirius. Radio is definitely not dead, especially if you look at these podcast numbers. Over half of Americans have listened to a podcast, and as of 2019, about 32% said they have done so in the past month. I also want you to check out this number. That's how many people worked in radio news in 2019. That's a few more journalists than worked in cable news that year. But as you can see from this table, the majority of the nation's almost 90,000 journalists work in newspaper and TV newsrooms. You have about 35,000 working in newspapers and about 30,000 working in broadcast TV. When you graduate, the goal is for you to have the skills and expertise needed to land a job in one of these traditional newsrooms. Now, my goal is that by learning the basics, you can take all of that stuff you're learning and apply it to new formats and new ways of telling stories. Some of what we do in broadcast can feel a little stale, but the way we talk, the way we piece things together, and the power that broadcast stories have to make people feel is something that we want to keep going. Time for your first lecture question. Take a look at this chart. It's from the Pew Research Center. What we're looking at is whether people prefer getting local news via TV or online. I'm going to give you a few seconds to check it out. Now look at the 65 plus group. They vastly prefer getting local news on TV. The 50 to 64 age group also has a strong preference for TV, but look at your age group. 60% prefer getting local news online, not on TV. I imagine this is going to be a problem for local TV news since the older audience isn't going to be around forever and younger audiences seem to want something different. So here's your question, and you don't have to write an essay here, just a few sentences, but what can local TV news do to appeal to the younger parts of the audience? What would they have to change? Pause this video, go answer the question in your Google Doc, that's your lecture questions Google Doc, and then we're going to talk about classic broadcast formats. Just a heads up, the following video is a parody. If you find British accents, cursing, or cursing with a British accent offensive, you are free to fast forward.
Before long, a standard news report visual language established itself, one that's immediately recognisable to anyone. Me has this report.
It starts here, with a lacklustre establishing shot of a significant location.
Next, a walkie-talkie preamble from the auteur, pacing steadily towards the lens, punctuating every other sentence with a hand gesture and ignoring all the pricks milling around him like he's gliding through the fucking Matrix, before coming to a halt and posing a question. What comes next?
Often something like this, a filler shot designed to give your eyes something to look at while my voice babbles on about facts. Sometimes it'll slow down to a halt, turn monochrome, and some of those facts will appear one by one on the screen. This is followed by the obligatory shots of overweight people with their faces subtly framed out, after which the report is padded out with a selection of lazy and pointless vox pops.
Usually get some inane chatter from people.
I think they do have too much. I think what we want to hear is actually what's happening and not what other people think of it.
I hate these sound bites. I don't want some punter's opinion usually. No.
Another bit of dull visual abstraction to plug another gap now before the report segues gracefully into a bit of human interest courtesy of some dowdy man opening letters in a kitchen and explaining how he's been affected by the issue.
When I'm watching the news, I don't really, there's a person talking to me, telling me what's going on, and I don't really listen to what they're saying. It's just news. It's just news.
He unfortunately was boring, so to wake you up, this is an animated chart, this is a silhouette representing the average family, and this is a lighthouse keeper being beheaded by a laser beam. As we near the end of the report, illustrative shots of pedestrians and signs and a pipe at a window.
And then the final summary, ending on a whimsical shot of something nearby, accompanied by a wry sign-off.
If you're lucky, a bit of wordplay fit for a king, or in other words, a regent's treat. Charlie Brooker, Newswipe, London.
So that video was made in 2010, and it's still funny a decade later because we really do kind of have a formula in broadcast news. And it can be kind of predictable and make things feel oversimplified. But classic broadcast story formats have stuck around for a long time for good reason. They communicate information effectively and efficiently despite all of their shortcomings. So pretty much any newscast that you watch or listen to is going to feature broadcast news that's packaged in a few very specific formats that we're going to learn about. The three major formats we use in broadcast have both an audio version and an audio plus video version, usually known as TV. The first format is simply a reporter or an anchor reading a story. In radio, we call this a reader. There are also readers in TV news, but we try to avoid them at all costs because when you have the ability to use visuals, you definitely should. So in TV, this format would involve a newscaster reading broadcast copy, that's what we call scripts, while video plays on the screen. So a voiceover, or as we call it, a VO. Next, we would add a soundbite. In radio, these are often referred to as RAs. That stands for reader actuality. What this means is that a reporter reads some copy, and then we hear a pre-recorded soundbite from a source. The soundbite is sometimes called an actuality. In the TV world, we would call this a VOSOT. The VO is the same as before. A reporter reads copy while video is playing, but now we add a soundbite. The SOT, S-O-T, stands for sound on tape. Even though we don't use tape anymore, the name stuck. Finally, we have a package, or the PKG. This is a fully pre-recorded, pre-edited piece that weaves together reporter voice and sound bites and natural sound. The parody piece that I had you watch with all of the cursing is a dig on the package format. We'll talk more about each one of these, but notice the timing element of each one. In TV, VOs are about 30 seconds, while a fully edited package is about 1 minute and 30 seconds, not including the part where the anchor introduces the story. Things tend to be a little bit longer over in radio. Packages over there are around 2 minutes, at least for the purposes of this class. In reality, they often tend to be much longer. Okay, let's listen to an example of a radio reader. Anytime you want to hear great radio copy, just head to npr.org and you'll see on the next screen where you should click to hear an hourly news update.
Live from NPR News, I'm Corva Coleman. Senate Republicans have unveiled their police reform bill. It is called the Justice Act. The proposed legislation includes incentives for police departments to ban chokeholds and requires more disclosure about police use of force. It also creates a commission to study conditions faced by black men and boys. Democrats have criticized the GOP legislation as watered down.
So a really simple format, but also has to be really well written to keep the listener's interest and be easy to understand. Radio readers should be between 20 seconds and 50 seconds. That's a big range, but definitely don't go over 50 seconds for these. All right, let's add a soundbite, or in radio speak, an actuality.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Giles Snyder. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio says it's too early to determine specifically whether last night's explosion in the city was a terrorist incident. However, he does say it was no accident.
The early indications, the initial indications, is this was an intentional act. We're going to have a lot more to say in the coming hours as we have more detailed analysis, but we believe at this point in time this was an intentional act.
29 people were injured by the blast that went off in Manhattan's Chelsea neighborhood. A second suspicious device was safely removed. The New York Times and other media outlets quoting law enforcement officials that it was a pressure cooker attached to wiring in a cell phone.
Again, a really simple format. An RA starts with reporter copy, The first sentence is the lead, followed by 2 or 3 more sentences that provide additional information and that set up the soundbite. All that reporter copy is usually being delivered live and is not pre-recorded. Then somebody punches a button and the soundbite plays. This part is obviously pre-recorded. And then we usually come back to the reporter and they read what's called a tag, which is the end of the story. Next, let's listen to a full radio package.
There you go, that one's ready to go.
Okay. In a commercial kitchen in downtown Reading, volunteers are slicing up pans of fresh herbed focaccia bread. Chef Jason Collis is overseeing today's lunch.
We're doing Italian sausage and pepper pasta with a sun-dried tomato pesto sauce.
Add in the cranberry almond salad, fresh fruit, and focaccia, and you've got a meal that's a far cry from your standard disaster rations. Collis is with World Central Kitchen, a global nonprofit network of chefs who believe gourmet quality food can heal not only the body, but the soul.
It brings back memories of Grandma's Italian sausage and peppers, and those little moments there help in a time of need.
Collis runs a catering business in Ventura, California. He says when the massive Thomas fire struck there last winter, he saw the difference good food made in his community. The project is also meant to put cash into the local economy at a time when many businesses are disrupted.
For instance, we're here at Sizzle's Kitchen in Reading, and we're renting the commercial kitchen space from them. We don't bring in all of our equipment. We purchase from local purveyors.
The Reading operation is making about 5,000 meals a day that go to Red Cross shelters and to emergency responders on the front line. Liam Moriarty, JPR News.
That one is kind of short for a radio package because these can be up to 2 minutes long. They're sometimes called a wrap because the reporter copy is wrapped around sound bites. The radio packages you'll be creating in this class will be between 1.5 minutes and 2 minutes long and feature interviews with at least 2 sources. They should also, like this package, feature as much natural sound as you can get. Now let's talk about TV. Same general principles as radio, but of course now you've got video. The 3 main types are VOs, VOSOTs, and packages. We're going to start small, so here is a VO.
Mayor LeVar Stoney wants to relocate the downtown social services building. The plan is to move the Department of Social Services from the Marshall Plaza building on 900 East Marshall Street to the long vacant Philip Morris building off of Bells Road in South Richmond. The move would make way for the $1.4 billion redevelopment of the Richmond Coliseum area. A spokesman for the mayor told the Richmond Times-Dispatch that social services had already been thinking of moving before the project was proposed.
So you have a reporter on camera, then video starts playing, and the anchor or reporter keeps talking over it. They're short, about 30 seconds max on local TV. You'll notice that the VO that we watched did a nice job of letting the video complement what the anchor was saying. We saw the Coliseum when he mentioned it. We saw the Phillips Morris building when he mentioned it. We'll talk more about that when we get to writing to video later in this semester. For now, let's check out a VOSOT.
New at 6, if you have a stack of unpaid parking tickets, now is the time to pay up. The City of Hartford hopes violators will beat the boot and make good on their outstanding tickets before their cars get booted. Vehicles with 5 or more unpaid tickets will get the boot starting in the middle of July.
The intent here is for parkers to be proactive and to beat the boot. That we're giving them an opportunity and an incentive to bring in their citations and pay them at a discount before we have to do the unfortunate task of collection efforts and booting.
So what's the discount? If you pay up between June 23rd and July 18th, you'll get 20% off the total amount due. The city has done a ticket amnesty program once before and collected more than $250,000 in overdue fines. For more specifics on the boot plans or to settle up any outstanding.
So technically that's a VOSOT VO. We saw the anchor read a lead on camera, then video started playing and she talked over it. Then we heard a SOT or a sound bite. Then we went back to video and she read the tag. And then she reminded viewers to check out the website because local news stations are obsessed with telling people to do that. Altogether, a VOSOT is around 50 seconds. Finally, let's look at a package. This one is from one of my Insight students.
The Curling Club of Virginia was founded in 2011 and has grown ever since. I was lucky enough to take a sweep on the ice.
4 players. The skip calls the shot, 1 player delivers the stone,
Two others sweep the ice. The goal? To get the stones in the house and close to the bullseye.
Well, it's such a weird sport. Like, you're sliding rocks on ice, and definitely everyone sees it and they're like, I can do that. It's not that hard.
Katie Brown always loved watching curling. So when her husband found a curling class in Richmond, he knew exactly what she was getting as a birthday present.
It was so much fun. It was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, and you're running up and down the full length of the ice, and that's why I'm so out of breath.
The pros make it look easy, but league member James Dyerly points out anyone can curl.
You cannot look at someone and tell how good they are at curling. And so our club, we have retirees, we've got middle-aged people, we've got 30s and 20s, we've got teenagers, men and women, and they can all beat you because you don't know how long they've been curling.
Curling originated in Scotland in the 1600s. Since then, it's grown into a worldwide sport. Dan Jokelson is also in the league. He says the sportsmanship in curling is unmatched compared to other sports.
One of the first times that I was in league, I got a Charlie horse and I couldn't sweep anymore. And so one of the members of the other team swept for me for the rest of the game because I couldn't do it.
Even the losing team wins something. A round of drinks from the winning team. The Curling Club of Virginia plays year-round, and they welcome everyone from beginners to seasoned skips. For VCU Insight, I'm Dakota Rust.
The TV package is what we'll spend the whole semester leading up to. It's a really effective format for a lot of reasons, which we'll get to. But as you can see, it's going to require you to know how to write broadcast copy, conduct interviews on camera, shoot solid video, and write in a way that complements that video. You'll have to voice your package and even make an on-camera appearance through a reporter stand-up. So what looks like a really simple story actually requires you to have a lot of skills to make it happen. But we aren't going to learn it all today. In the next lesson, we're going to start small by looking at the words we use in broadcast and how we say them.